My name is David, and I'm about to tell you a story that will shake you to your core. It's a story about love, betrayal, and the kind of justice that only comes when someone underestimates the power of a man who has nothing left to lose. It started 18 months ago when I was sitting in Dr. Martinez's office, staring at the X-rays on his computer screen. The dark shadows on my lungs looked like storm clouds, and in many ways, they were about to bring the worst storm of my life. Stage 3 lung cancer, he said, his voice gentle but firm. We caught it early enough that treatment is definitely an option. But David, I won't lie to you. This is going to be a fight. I remember the drive home that day like it was yesterday. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear of death, but from fear of telling my wife, Sarah. We'd been married for 15 years, and I thought we'd weathered every storm together. I thought she was my rock, my anchor in any storm. How wrong I was. When I walked through our front door that evening, Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing dinner like any other Tuesday. She looked up with that smile I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, and for a moment, I almost couldn't bring myself to shatter the normalcy of our life. "Hey honey, how was your day?" she asked, stirring something that smelled like her famous marinara sauce. I sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd planned our future, where we'd laughed and cried and dreamed together. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I went to see Dr. Martinez today about those persistent coughs I've been having." She stopped stirring and turned to face me, her expression shifting from casual interest to concern. "I have cancer, Sarah. Lung cancer. Stage 3. The wooden spoon fell from her hand and clattered to the floor. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at me. Then she rushed over and wrapped me in her arms, and I felt her tears on my shoulder. "We're going to fight this together," she whispered. "Whatever it takes, we're going to beat this thing." I believed her. God help me. I believed every word. The next few months were a blur of doctor's appointments, chemotherapy sessions, and radiation treatments. The cancer center became my second home, and Sarah seemed to be right there with me through it all. She drove me to appointments when I was too weak to drive myself. She held my hand during the chemo sessions. She made me soup when I couldn't keep anything else down. But looking back now, I realized there were signs. Little things that I was too sick and too trusting to notice. She started working late more often. She'd come home from her job at the marketing firm smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. She became protective of her phone, taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. She started talking about our finances more, asking detailed questions about my 401k, my life insurance policies, our savings accounts. At the time, I thought she was just being responsible. I thought she was scared and trying to make sure we'd be financially prepared for whatever came next. I even appreciated it. Here I was, fighting for my life, and my wife was taking care of all the practical stuff. I was such a fool. The worst part is that I was actually responding well to treatment. By month 4, Dr. Martinez was cautiously optimistic. The tumors were shrinking. My prognosis was improving. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was going to beat this thing. That's when Sarah struck. It was a Thursday morning in March. I was having a good day. One of those rare days when the chemo brain fog lifted and I felt almost human again. I was sitting in our living room, catching up on some work emails, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a young man in a cheap suit holding a manila envelope. "David Mitchell?" he asked. "That's me. You've been served." He handed me the envelope and walked away. I stood there in my bathrobe, staring at the legal documents in my hands. Divorce papers. Sarah had filed for divorce. But that wasn't even the worst part. I stumbled back to the couch and read through the documents with growing horror. Sarah wasn't just filing for divorce, she was claiming that I had been hiding assets. She was asking for temporary spousal support, claiming she needed immediate access to our joint accounts to maintain her standard of living during the divorce proceedings. She was taking everything. My hands were shaking as I called her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called her office. Her assistant said she was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. I sat there in our living room, surrounded by the life we'd built together, and I felt something break inside me. It wasn't my heart. My heart had been broken. This was something deeper, something fundamental about my faith in human nature, my belief that people were fundamentally good, that love meant something. Sarah came home that evening with Chinese takeout, acting like nothing had happened. "I got your favorite," she said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "Sweet and sour chicken." "I got served today," I said quietly. She stopped unpacking the food and turned to face me. For just a moment, I saw something in her eyes, not remorse, not guilt, but something calculating. David, I can explain. Explain what? How you filed for divorce while I'm fighting cancer. How you're trying to take everything we've built together. How you're claiming I've been hiding assets when I can barely remember what day it is half the time. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and I saw the woman I'd loved for 15 years transform into someone I didn't recognize. You might not survive this, David. I have to think about my future. I have to protect myself financially. Your future? I'm responding well to treatment. Dr. Martinez is optimistic. But what if you're not? What if you die and leave me with nothing but medical bills? I stared at her, this woman who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, for better or worse, until death do us part. Sarah, even if the worst happens, you know I've made sure you'll be taken care of. The life insurance alone is worth $500,000. Our savings, the house, my 401k, you'd inherit everything. She looked away. It's not that simple. That's when I knew there was more to this story. Over the next few days, I started piecing together the truth. It wasn't easy. I was still undergoing treatment, still fighting for my life, but I was also fighting for something else now. My dignity, my sense of justice, my future. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Reed. He was a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes, and he was expensive. But I figured if Sarah was going to take everything anyway, I might as well spend some of it finding out what she'd already taken. What Marcus found was worse than I'd imagined. Sarah had been having an affair for 8 months, since shortly after my diagnosis. Her lover was a man named Derek Walsh, a wealthy real estate developer who was going through his own messy divorce. They'd been meeting at expensive hotels, taking weekend trips to wine country, and Sarah had been paying for her half of these extravagances with our money. But the affair was just the beginning. Sarah had been systematically draining our accounts for months. She'd taken out credit cards in my name, maxed them out, and hidden the bills. She borrowed against my 401k without my knowledge. She'd even taken out a second mortgage on our house, forging my signature on the documents. By the time I found out, she'd stolen over $200,000. Marcus presented me with a thick folder of evidence, bank records, hotel receipts, photographs, text messages that Sarah had been careless enough to leave on a cloud backup that she'd forgotten about. This is criminal, Marcus said, sitting across from me in my living room. This isn't just divorce, this is theft, fraud, forgery. She could go to prison for this. I looked through the evidence, my anger growing with each page. Photos of Sarah and Derek at romantic dinners while I was at home, too sick to eat. Credit card statements showing purchases at Victoria's Secret and expensive jewelry stores. Bank records showing transfers from our joint savings account to an account I'd never seen before. What are my options? I asked. You could have her arrested. You could sue her in civil court. You could fight the divorce and expose everything. I thought about it for a long moment. The old David would have done exactly that. He would have fought tooth and nail, exposed her publicly, sent her to prison if possible. But I wasn't the old David anymore. Cancer had changed me. It had shown me that life was short, that revenge was a dish that often left you hungry, that sometimes the best justice was the kind that came from the shadows. I have a different idea, I told Marcus. But I'm going to need your help. What I'm about to tell you might sound crazy, but remember, I was a man who had nothing left to lose. Sarah had already taken everything. My health, my trust, my money, my future. She thought she was dealing with a dying man who was too weak to fight back. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Over the next 2 weeks, while Sarah thought she was winning, I was preparing my counterstrike. I worked with Marcus to gather even more evidence. I consulted with a criminal attorney named Jennifer Walsh, ironically, Derek's soon-to-be ex-wife, who was more than happy to help me take down her husband's mistress. But the most important part of my plan was a letter. A letter that would change everything. You see, Sarah had made one crucial mistake. She assumed that because I was sick, I was also stupid. She assumed that because I was fighting cancer, I wasn't paying attention to anything else. She assumed that she could steal from me, cheat on me, and abandon me, and I would just roll over and accept it. She was wrong. I spent days crafting this letter, revising it, perfecting it. It had to be just right, because it was going to be the last thing I ever said to her. At least, that's what she would think. The divorce proceedings were scheduled to begin on a Monday morning in April. Sarah had no idea what was coming. She'd been living in her fantasy world for months now, spending stolen money on her lover, planning her new life, probably laughing about how easily she'd fooled her sick husband. The night before the hearing, I did something that probably sounds insane. I had Marcus help me stage my own death. Well, not actually, but I made it look like I'd died. I left evidence that I'd taken an overdose of my pain medication. I left a note that talked about how I couldn't face the divorce, how I couldn't bear to see Sarah take everything, how I was sorry for being such a burden. And then I disappeared. Marcus helped me check into a hotel under a false name. We waited. Sarah found the suicide note on Tuesday morning. She called 911, crying hysterically. The police and paramedics came, but of course, they couldn't find a body. They searched everywhere, the house, the yard, the nearby lake. Nothing. Sarah played the part of the grieving widow perfectly. She even made it onto the local news, tearfully talking about how the stress of the divorce had driven her beloved husband to take his own life. But she made one mistake. Within hours of my supposed death, she was on the phone with the insurance company, asking about the life insurance payout. She was calling the bank, asking about access to accounts. She was already planning how to spend the money. That's when I struck. 3 days after my supposed death, while Sarah was meeting with lawyers about how to expedite the insurance claims, she received a package. It was delivered by courier to her office, marked personal and confidential. Inside was a letter. My letter. The letter that would change everything. Let me read it to you. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then my plan worked perfectly. You thought I was dead, didn't you? You thought your sick, stupid husband had finally done you the favor of dying and leaving you with all the money. Surprise. I know about Derek. I know about the affair that started 2 months after my cancer diagnosis. I know about the hotels, the trips, the dinners you paid for with our money while I was home too sick to eat. I know about the stolen money. All $200,000 of it. I know about the credit cards you opened in my name, the loans you took out, the mortgage you forged my signature on. I know about the divorce papers you filed while I was fighting for my life. I know everything, Sarah. And soon, so will everyone else. You see, while you thought you were playing me, I was playing you. While you thought you were stealing from a dying man, I was gathering evidence. While you thought you were getting away with it, I was building a case. But here's the thing, I'm not dead. I'm very much alive, and I'm about to become your worst nightmare. By the time you read this letter, copies of all the evidence have been delivered to the police, the district attorney, the IRS, and your employer. You'll be charged with fraud, theft, forgery, and perjury. You'll lose your job, your reputation, and your freedom. Derek, too. His divorce just got a lot more expensive. You thought you were stealing from a dead man, but you were actually stealing from a man who had nothing left to lose. Do you know what that makes a person capable of? You're about to find out. The house has been sold. The money has been moved to accounts you can't access. The insurance policies have been changed. The will has been updated. You get nothing. Absolutely nothing. Oh, and Sarah? I'm not dying anymore. My latest scans are clear. I'm in remission. I'm going to live a long, happy life. You can't say the same. Your loving husband, David. P.S. I've left copies of this letter with my attorney to be opened in case anything happens to me. If I have an accident, if I disappear, if I die under suspicious circumstances, you'll be the first person they investigate. So please, for your own sake, don't do anything stupid. P.S. I've also left a copy with Derek's wife. She says to tell you thank you for making her divorce settlement so much easier. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Sarah called my cell phone within minutes of reading the letter, screaming, crying, begging. I let it go to voicemail. She called 17 times that first day. By evening, she was in handcuffs. The police arrested her at Derek's apartment, where she'd gone to hide after reading my letter. Derek was arrested too, for his part in the financial fraud. It turns out that when you're stealing money to fund an affair, you become an accessory to the theft. The local news picked up the story within hours. Woman steals from cancer-stricken husband was the headline. Sarah's sob story about driving her husband to suicide fell apart when I walked into the police station very much alive. The evidence Marcus and I had gathered was overwhelming. The bank records, the forged signatures, the credit card fraud, it was all documented, all provable, all devastating. Sarah was charged with multiple felonies. Her bail was set at $100,000, money she no longer had access to since I'd moved all our assets to accounts she couldn't touch. Derek, meanwhile, discovered that his own divorce had just become much more expensive. His wife now had evidence of adultery and fraud, which in our state meant she was entitled to a much larger settlement. Sarah's trial began 6 months later. I was there every day, sitting in the front row, healthy and very much alive. The prosecution presented our evidence methodically. bank records showing the systematic draining of our accounts, hotel receipts proving the affair, forged documents with Sarah's handwriting, text messages between Sarah and Derek planning their future together with my money. Sarah's defense attorney tried to paint her as a scared woman who was preparing for widowhood, but the evidence was too strong. The timeline was too clear. The amounts were too large. The deception was too calculated. The most damning evidence was a recording Marcus had made of Sarah talking to Derek about how she was going to take everything from that dying bastard and how they'd be set for life once I was gone. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sarah was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution, not just the money she'd stolen, but damages, interest, and legal fees. The total came to over $300,000. Derek got 3 years for his part in the fraud. As I'm telling you this story, it's been 1 year since Sarah's sentencing. I'm happy to report that my cancer remains in remission. My hair has grown back, I've gained weight, and I feel better than I have in years. I sold the house where Sarah and I lived together. Too many bad memories. I bought a smaller place by the lake, with a view of the water and room for a garden. I retired early, using some of the money I recovered from Sarah's fraud to buy a small cabin in the mountains where I go to write. I'm working on a book about my experience, not for revenge, but for other people who might find themselves in similar situations. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. I learned that sometimes the best justice is the kind you create yourself. I learned that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. But most importantly, I learned that surviving cancer wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever do. Surviving Sarah was. If you're still with me after all this, you might be wondering what the point of this story is. Why am I telling you about the worst period of my life? What's the lesson here? The lesson is this. People will show you who they really are when they think you're not paying attention. When they think you're weak, when they think you're vulnerable, when they think you can't fight back. That's when their true character emerges. Sarah thought she was dealing with a dying man who was too sick to notice what she was doing. She thought she could steal from me, cheat on me, and abandon me because I was too weak to stop her. She was wrong. The other lesson is about justice. Sometimes the legal system works. Sometimes criminals are caught and punished. Sometimes good people win and bad people lose. But sometimes you have to create your own justice. Sometimes you have to be smarter than the people trying to hurt you. Sometimes you have to play the long game. I'm not saying everyone should fake their own death to catch a cheating spouse. That's probably not legal advice anyone should follow. But I am saying that sometimes, when you have nothing left to lose, you discover you have everything to gain. Sarah writes to me sometimes from prison. She sends letters apologizing, explaining, begging for forgiveness. She talks about how she was scared, how she made mistakes, how she's sorry. I don't read them anymore. I return them unopened. You see, I learned something important during my cancer treatment. Life is precious, but it's also short. You can't waste it on people who don't deserve it. You can't spend your healthy days thinking about people who wished you'd die. I'm alive. I'm healthy. I'm free. Sarah is none of those things. And that, my friends, is the kind of justice that money can't buy. The letter I left changed everything, not just for Sarah, but for me. It was the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a survivor. It was the moment I stopped letting other people write my story and started writing my own. If you're facing your own betrayal, your own impossible situation, your own moment when you feel like you have nothing left to lose, remember this. Sometimes having nothing left to lose is the most powerful position you can be in. Sometimes the people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest gift they could possibly give you, the element of surprise. Use it wisely. And remember, the best revenge is not just living well. The best revenge is living well while your enemies face the consequences of their choices. I'm living proof of that. My name is David Mitchell, and this is my story. This is how a letter changed everything. Thank you for listening.